In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
St. Nicholas is one of the most beloved saints in the world, and he is particularly close to us because he is the patron saint of our Ruthenian Byzantine Catholic Church. He is also a patron to all Christians that follow the Byzantine rite, whether Catholic or Orthodox. We have two feasts that we celebrate on our liturgical calendar that are dedicated to St. Nicholas. Of course, December 6th. And the other feast is May 9th, which is the feast of the translation of his relics from Myra to Bari, Italy. Now, as much as he's close to us, Byzantine Catholics, he is also particularly close to children. But he has many, many, many other patronages. He is a patron saint of sailors, of travelers, unmarried women, repentant thieves, falsely accused, victims of human trafficking. He is a patron of countless churches all over the world. Every city in Russia has a church named after him. He's a patron saint of Russia, of Greece, and of Bari, Italy, where his relics lie, as well as many, many other places. We have 25 churches in our Ruthenian metropolia dedicated to St. Nicholas. So we see in St. Nicholas a saint who has something for everyone. So many people throughout the world have called on his intercession for all kinds of needs, and he never fails to bring blessings and help. I want to say just a couple of words briefly about the saints. A priest once observed that of those parishioners in his parish who studied the lives of the saints, made more progress in the spiritual life than those who did not study or come close to the lives of the saints. In our Eastern Catholic Catechism, Light for Life, this same conviction is taught to us. It says this: as we grow in spiritual maturity, we become much more in touch with the reality of the communion of saints. At this stage, we realize deeply that the saints are our brothers and sisters in the faith. They become for us that cloud of witnesses that not only prays with us and for us, but they encourage all of us to grow in the fellowship of the Holy Spirit. We come to know the saints more deeply through our Byzantine liturgical services. That would be matins, vespers, akathistes, molebens. All of these things express the faith in the language of poetry and symbolism. Poetry and symbolism touch the deepest part of our spirit, and they awaken within us the spiritual and theological aspects of the faith and the saints' lives. So we can say, if you want to know what we believe, listen to the hymns that we sing in all of our liturgical services. When we are under the patronage of a particular saint, we attract the help of that saint, and we gain their spiritual protection. Here in this parish of St. John Chrysostom in Houston, Texas, we have 4 sets of patron saints. First of all, St. Nicholas, who is the patron saint, as I mentioned, of Byzantine Catholics. We also have the patronage of St. Cyril and Methodius, our founding fathers, who brought the Byzantine faith from Constantinople to Moravia in the 9th century, and it spread throughout Europe, and eventually that faith was brought to the United States by European immigrants. And so we should particularly remember them with gratitude and honor their memory for planting the faith of our fathers, St. Cyril and Methodius, here in this country. The next patron saint of our parish is, of course, St. John Chrysostom. He is the patron and protector of our parish. His relic is here, and we should always make a point of venerating his icon and his relic at some point whenever we come into the church. And finally, the last group of patron saints for us in this parish would be our martyred bishops of the Ruthenian Byzantine Catholic Church. We plan on getting to know them in the future in a Cloud of Witnesses presentation. Father Tom and I have had some discussion about possibly, or maybe more than possibly, but putting them on the agenda so that we can really come to know our martyred bishops. Every member of the parish, both young and old, should be able to recognize these patron saints by their icons. They're all on the icon screen except for the Ruthenian martyred bishops, who are, I believe, are going to be coming through their icon into the parish at some point. But we should all be able to recognize these saints, and also, to some extent, we should be able, both young and old, to describe their lives and their missions. And I want to say just a word or two about icons, and then we'll get into St. Nicholas. Icons are not simply interesting or unusual works of art. Icons are theology in line and color. Icons are integral to our worship as Byzantine Catholics, and they accompany us throughout the liturgical year. I use them extensively in my presentations. Sometimes I'll use upwards of a dozen or more icons in the Cloud of Witnesses presentations. Why? Because icons tell us something. They teach us something. That's why we can read an icon and have at least a basic understanding of what the icon is telling us. And so another popular expression we have in our church is, if you want to know what we believe, look at our icons. There's another reality about icons that I want to point out. When we look at an icon of our Lord or his mother or a saint, it's not so much that we're looking at them, but they are looking at us. And they are drawing us into the spiritual and heavenly realm where they abide. We should always be aware of the saints' spiritual presence in our lives. We should cultivate a close relationship with them. We should ask for their intercession. And we should honor and venerate the saints privately and publicly. St. Nicholas. This is a prototypical image of St. Nicholas. You'll notice in iconography, he seems like he always looks the same. He has curly hair, he has a curly beard, he's usually dressed in bishop's garments, holding a gospel book, with his right hand a blessing. He's dressed like a bishop. In some icons, he's wearing a Byzantine crown, which is a domed crown like the one on our iconostas, but in others he is not. St. Nicholas was born somewhere around the year 270 in Patara, which was Asia Minor. It's modern-day Turkey. That area where he was born was a Greek civilization, and his family was Greek. He was born to devout and pious parents. They were well-to-do, and their names were Theophanes and Nona, which we should all remember because he made a promise that he would bless us if we remembered his parents. We heard the same promise with St. Seraphim of Sarov. His parents were Theophanes and Nona. They devoted their lives to serving the needs of the sick. They despaired of having a child, and they prayed to God with tears and offering alms, and they were blessed with their one and only child, who was named after his uncle Nicholas, who was a bishop. The name Nicholas means victor of nations. Nike or Niki means victor or conqueror. From the time Nicholas was born, it seemed like his life moved from miracle to miracle. The miracles began when he was an infant. On Wednesdays and Fridays, he only nursed from his mother after his parents prayed their evening prayers. And then he only nursed from his mother's right side, because one day he would stand on the Lord's right side with the blessed. The first major miracle of his life occurred at his baptism. It is said in the tradition of our faith that Nicholas stood in the baptismal font unaided for 3 hours. And the church sees this as symbolic of the Holy Trinity, as an act of glorifying the Holy Trinity. The Trinity and the pattern of threes would be prevalent throughout his life, as if the Holy Trinity was imprinted in everything he did. His parents died while he was still an adolescent, and being an only child, he inherited their wealth, which he lovingly gave away to the poor. And so it has been said that Nicholas was the first philanthropist because he designated his wealth to be used at a certain time in a certain way. He also had the habit from the very beginning of remaining anonymous in his giving. As a young man, he lived during the time of Christian persecutions, and he was given the opportunity to bear heroic witness to the faith because he was imprisoned, he was tortured, and he suffered for the faith for a very long, hard 7 years. During his life, he was considered a confessor of the faith, which is another one of the classifications of saints we have in the Eastern churches. His title, other than being Archbishop of Myra, is Wonder Worker, which is another classification we have in the Eastern churches. Nicholas became a monk, and he wanted to devote his life to solitude and prayer in the desert until he had a vision that he was not called to the desert, but he was called to fulfill God's plan in other ways. He was ordained a deacon, he was ordained a priest, but he always lived like a pauper. There were times he had no clothes, no shoes, no food, because he gave everything to the poor. He was known for his fasting, keeping vigils, praying without ceasing. In his outward character, he was known to be kind, humble, generous, loving, and charitable. Through divine intervention, he was made a bishop. The Archbishop of Myra had recently died, and the bishops gathered to try to determine a successor. And they believed if they turned to God in prayer rather than turning to each other to come up with a bishop, that God would choose the successor rather than the successor being chosen by men. So the bishops fasted and prayed, and one of the eldest bishops had a vision. An angel appeared to him and told him to stand guard at the door of the church, and the first person to enter the church the next morning would be the one chosen by God to become the next bishop. And it happened exactly as it was foretold. Nicholas entered the church. The eldest bishop said, "What is your name?" He said, "Nicholas." And they knew that this, in fact, was God's chosen one to succeed the Archbishop of Myra, who had reposed. He is often referred to as the boy bishop because he was only 30 years old when he was consecrated a bishop. There are many, many stories of St. Nicholas. Because of a little time constraint this morning, and because we just can't get to all of them, there's just 3 in particular that are consistent throughout the tradition of our faith that must be mentioned. The first one is the story of the man with 3 daughters. There was a wealthy man who was independent and well off, and he fell on hard times, and he found himself impoverished. He had 3 daughters of marriageable age, but he couldn't afford a dowry to marry off his daughters. Of course, a dowry is money or property that a daughter would bring into the marriage. So being poor and desperate and not knowing what to do, he hatched a plot in his mind to sell his daughters into slavery. And I won't elaborate, but I think we get the idea of what he was intending to do for his daughters to be able to make money. St. Nicholas heard about their situation, and secretly in the middle of the night, he went to the house and he threw a bag of money into the window. The man awoke the next morning. He was awestruck, of course, at his good fortune. The next night, St. Nicholas arrived again. He repeated the gesture. He threw a bag of money. The next morning, the man was shocked once again that a second time money just flew through the window. We wish it would work that way, but most of us have to work for a living. He did it a third time, and the third time he threw a bag of money through the window. And so not only now were the daughters able to enter into a reputable marriage, but the saint's generosity led to the conversion of the father, who repented of his wicked plot and his idea to sell off his daughters. And so the tradition of hanging stockings or putting shoes by the fire comes from this act of St. Nicholas. One thing I want to point out in the icon is how the iconographer brilliantly extended the bed linens down from each of the daughters and formed them in the shape of a stocking. So this is where the custom has developed of St. Nicholas coming at night to distribute gifts. Another famous story is the story of St. Nicholas and the miracle at sea. He embarked on a trip to the Holy Land to venerate the holy places, and as the ship left the coast, Nicholas foresaw a violent tempest was going to arise because he had seen the devil enter the ship intending to sink it and drown the passengers. The ship set sail, a storm arose, and the people on board begged St. Nicholas to pray for them. St. Nicholas prayed, a great calm settled over the water, and the storm subsided. However, one of the men fell, he had climbed the ship's mast, he fell onto the deck, and he was killed. And St. Nicholas prayed for the man, and he was restored to life. In our Akathist to St. Nicholas, he is referred to as a new Noah because he drives away the storm of all evils. He is a calm to the storm-tossed, and he is a strong ruler of the raging of the sea. The last little story we have of St. Nicholas, we don't have an icon of this, but it's the story of the three pickled children. There was an evil shopkeeper in Myra who kidnapped 3 children and killed them and threw them in a pickling tub. St. Nicholas heard about this horror, and he prayed, and the children were restored to life. And this is where we get the tradition of pickle ornaments at Christmas, which you see everywhere. And this is why the good Kowalik family put pickles on the cupcakes this morning. So now you know why there's a pickle on a cupcake. Okay, so we've seen the generous, compassionate side of St. Nicholas, but there's another side of him that we want to certainly mention, and it's righteous anger in the face of blasphemy. Because Nicholas' greatest love was love of God, he couldn't abide anyone spreading false teaching about him. This brings us to the Council of Nicaea. In the year 325, the Emperor Constantine convened the first council, ecumenical council of Nicaea. 318 bishops were in attendance, and the purpose of this council was to address the issue of Arianism. Arius, of course, was a priest in Alexandria, who the Arian heresy is named after. And to summarize this heresy, Arius was proclaiming that Jesus was not God. He was merely created by God, but he was not co-eternal with God. And the famous slogan of the Arians was, "There was a time when he was not." And so one of the most important words to emerge from the Council of Nicaea, and one of the most important words in salvation history, is the word homoousios. It's a Greek word, and it means same substance. This is our belief, that Jesus was of the same substance as God. He was one in being with the Father, one in essence with the Father, consubstantial with the Father, true God from true God. However, the Arian heresy was professing something different. If you put the letter I in the middle of the word homoousios, it completely changes the meaning, and when it's referred to Jesus Christ, it becomes heresy, because homoousios means similar substance. He was not of the same substance as God, the Arians say, which is heresy. And so at the Council of Nicaea, St. Nicholas couldn't take it anymore, as Arius was professing this heresy. And so Nicholas got up and he walked across the council and he slapped Arius in the face. This is the slap that was heard around the world. Well, this was shocking. It was disturbing. 318 bishops were gathered. What to do? The Emperor Constantine said to the bishops, "You decide what to do in the case of this assault." And so the bishops divested Nicholas of his episcopal garments, and they threw him in prison. And when he was in prison, God asked him, "Why did you do this?" And he said, "Because of my love for you." Meanwhile, back at the council, several of the council fathers had a vision that Jesus appeared to Nicholas holding a gospel book, and the Mother of God appeared to him holding an omophorion, and they took that as a sign that Nicholas was acting in righteous anger and not out of his passions. When Nicholas awoke the next morning, he was vested in his episcopal garments. What happened to Arius? He was anathematized, he was excommunicated, he was sent into exile. What happened to him at the end? He deceived the Emperor Constantine into thinking he had repented of his homoousian position. The emperor was deceived because Arius put his hand on his heart and he said, "This is what I believe." And so the emperor thought, well, he must have changed his mind, and he now believes in that Jesus Christ is true God. The problem is, when he stuffed his hand in his coat, he had a piece of paper, or whatever it would have been at that time, that had the false Arian teaching on it. So when Arius said, "This is what I believe," he was telling the truth, but he was professing the wrong teaching about Jesus Christ. So the Emperor Constantine was going to restore him back to the church. And Arius was going to be reinstated into the Cathedral of Hagia Irene in Constantinople. The Patriarch of Constantinople saw through this deception. He began to fast and to pray. He prostrated himself on the floor of the cathedral, and he prayed, "God, either take me out before Arius comes back into the church, or take Arius out." On the way to the church, Arius and his band of supporters were arrogantly marching through the streets. Arius had stomach trouble, and so he excused himself. He found a restroom. He was seated on the throne, and his stomach split open, his entrails spilled out, and he literally died in his blood and his filth like Judas. It is a very fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. What happened to St. Nicholas? He died a natural death. in peace around 75 years old. His relics were translated from Myra to Bari, Italy, at the behest of the Pope of Rome. On the voyage from Myra to Bari, one of the soldiers stole some of the relics for himself. St. Nicholas appeared to the captain, and he told him, when the soldier returns all of the relics back into the box, the sea will become calm because a storm had arose, and they will make safe passage. The soldier repented of his deed. He restored the relics that he had stolen back to the box, and everything happened exactly as St. Nicholas foretold. They made safe passage then to Bari, Italy, where his relics have been since 1087. Every year on May 9th, our Byzantine church commemorates the translation of these relics from Myra to Bari, Italy. And as you have been told and you've read about, the manna that exudes from his crypt is miraculous, and people have prayed to St. Nicholas, and he continues to work miracles through his manna and through his intercession, which we were very blessed to be anointed with. So as we now prepare for St. Nicholas to arrive, I want to just end with this excerpt from Vespers of the Feast of St. Nicholas. We have gathered to celebrate and to praise with song the model of bishops and the glory of the fathers. Let us sing to the saintly Nicholas. You still pray to God for us who celebrate your feast with faith and who honor you with zeal and joy. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.